Hello, everyone. So while people are trickling in, I'm just going to start us off with a quick introduction. So first of all, we want to welcome you. This is a special edition of All Tech is Humans live stream series, where we engage in conversations with responsible tech leaders to address some of the world's thorniest tech and society issues. So today, this is a very special one. We have a webinar in partnership with our good friends at New Public. And the purpose of today's conversation is to offer insights, to share resources, and to provide support to members of our communities who are dealing with challenging career transitions, especially for those of you who have been laid off from the US federal government recently. I'm your host today. I'm the executive director of All Tech is Human, Rebekah Tweed. We're based right here where I am sitting in New York City, but All Tech is Human has a global audience. The community that we have built is the world's largest multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary network in responsible tech. We have well over 50,000 people, and we are all united around a shared mission of better aligning technology with our shared human public interest. We emphasize collective understanding, collective involvement, and collective action, and we prioritize engaging a broad range of people. Responsible tech calls for all backgrounds, disciplines, and lived experiences to be involved in designing, developing, and deploying the technologies that impact all of our lives. So please find out how to get more involved at alltechishuman.org. You'll see all of our different activities across our 3 pillars: community building, education and resource development, and responsible tech careers, which brings us together today. We host mixers and summits in New York, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and London. And we just launched our new ATIH-X program. These are independently organized gatherings, and they're happening all over the globe. We've had our first few over the past couple of weeks, and these have taken place in Barcelona, Toronto, and Paris. We also have a Slack community of 12,000 members across 105 countries, and we have 2 newsletters. So All Tech is Human has a flagship bi-monthly Substack, and everyone should be subscribed to that. And then our new one is solely dedicated to responsible tech careers. So you can find both of those at alltechishuman.org. So before we jump into the panel discussion, I want to give us a bit of housekeeping here. We will be saving time for audience questions, so please do drop those into the Q&A text box at any point, not the chat, but the Q&A. And we're going to select a few for the panelists. Please note, our staff will be reviewing those submitted questions. We'll be selecting a few to discuss in the second half of our conversation, but those questions are only going to appear once they've been addressed by the panelists. So you might not see your question appear as soon as you submit it, but don't worry, we have received it. And in addition to the Q&A feature, as you've noticed, we do have the chat enabled. We really encourage everyone to use that chat to connect with each other, introduce yourself, where you're from, what you specialize in. If you're looking for a role, please share that so people can help connect you with opportunities. And if you're hiring for a role, please share that as well. All right, so we're going to jump right in. I'm thrilled to have these experts with us today. So we have All Tech is Humans Siegel Research Fellow, Deb Donig. And Deb is the lead principal investigator on the Cal Poly research team assessing the future of the ethical technology workforce. She previously served as an advisor on the Biden-Harris policy strategy team in higher education. We also have Deepti Doshi, the co-director of New Public, and Deepti created the community partnerships team at Meta, as well as helping to establish the new product experimentation team as a director at Meta. She also founded Hiya, India's largest community organizing platform, Escuela Nueva India, an education company that serves the urban poor, and the Fellows Program at Acumen Fund to build leaders for the social enterprise sector. And we have Camille Stewart Gloster, who is Crowdstrike's Director of AI and Resilience Services. And Camille has expertise in tech, cybersecurity, national security, and foreign policy, and has held pivotal roles across government and private sectors, including at the White House, the Department of Homeland Security, Google, and Deloitte. And Camille is the CEO and principal of CAS Strategies, LLC. And we are so glad to have you with us today. So a warm welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. And we are going to get started. So I'd like to start with you, Deb. So you've been researching the emergence of this new field of at the intersection of tech and society, all of these new roles. Can you help us understand a little bit about what the state of the market is right now? What are you seeing in your research?
Sure. So I can first say that this is not what I would call a new field anymore. I would say it's about a decade old now. And through that decade, we've seen a number of different trends, dips, surges in the way in which industry and civil society, NGOs, and pu the public interest, as well as government, has looked at, conceived of, imagined, and tried to implement responsible technology practices within a variety of different sectors. What we're seeing right now, I think, is an unfortunate backlash against 10 years of headway in developing responsible technology practices, implementing them, and furthermore, and I just want to really emphasize this, extending basic civil rights and human rights principles to technological practices. There are basic human rights and civil rights principles that we assume in every other sector that the tech industry, and I'm here speaking particularly of big tech and more specifically of big tech in the digital realm, has not implemented or has willfully ignored. Um, as many of you, I'm sure, are familiar, and I saw some information from folks coming in the chat, people directly affected by Donald Trump's administration, which is headed by people who have, for a very long time, voiced opposition to technology practices developed in a responsible realm, have extended some of that antagonism right now to the government in particular. And what we're seeing right now, I hesitate to call it a crisis, but I would say that there is a severe impact of that backlash and that antagonism in the job sector, as I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with. Now, you've all read the gloom and doom. I assume many of you know about Doge's purges of, that's the Department of Government Efficiency headed by Elon Musk. I'm assuming that many people know of those purges already in government, as well as the things that are happening in industry, including Google taking down its policy page, an indication that it is rolling back its responsible tech practices and doing so in order, I would argue, to more actively secure and procure government contracts that intersect at the availability of those contracts, the capacity of those contracts to be used for militarization, the development of military technologies in particular by these companies, and their ability to pursue the ambitions of profits without the kinds of safeguards that these policy pages and protections have previously offered. So what we're seeing right now across the entire sector is a rollback of, I would say, 10 years of that progress. Now, again, gloom and doom, I do want to offer a little bit of a silver lining. Many of you may have come across Mark Cuban's announcement that he is offering a massive amount of venture funding. I believe the number is close to $1 billion for people who are being terminated from government jobs, particularly in elite units. One is, for example, 18F, the elite program composed of developers and engineers for developing open source tools for the government. And what Cuban is arguing, and I think that this is a credible argument, is that in firing these workers, the government has done so very haphazardly and without thinking about the consequences for what this will amount to in terms of government inefficiencies and ultimately ineffectiveness. And those people who have been let go from these jobs are now independent workers who can become independent contractors, who can start their own companies, and who eventually, when the government discovers that it now has created its own inefficiencies, will be needed by that government as independent contractors and as people who can now come back to the government, as Cuban writes, on their own terms and with higher price demands for salaries and contracts. Now, as a taxpayer, This makes me very unhappy because I would like to see a government that builds its own programs effectively, efficiently using the tax dollars that I have provided for them to do so, rather than buying them at high cost from a industry that now have been privatized. But for workers who are interested in this, I think that there's an opportunity there to form collectives, to develop consultancy practices, to get funding and venture where it is available, and it is available, and then finally to come back, provide these services on your own terms at your own asking price.
Deb, thank you so much for that context. And I think that's a fantastic idea to consider not only what's available out there, opportunities, jobs that are already there, but carving out your own path, finding ways to offer consulting and other services. And I will say that Dr. Ruman Chowdhury, in response to Mark Cuban's tweets, was basically saying, here are some people who have done just that. And she's incubated with her organization, Humane Intelligence, a couple of people from NIST who are providing these types of consulting services. And I think there's a lot of room for that type of offering. So for All Tech is Human, you might know we have a responsible tech job board, and we have many, over 900 roles right now at the basically mitigating the harms of technology, diversifying the tech pipeline, and ensuring that tech is aligned with the public interest. There's a lot that falls into those categories. And I will say we have just many opportunities across every level. And I would like to point to a few of the roles that we will be having on the job board that are housed at New Public. So Deepti, I want to turn to you. You have, I believe, 4 open roles right now. Would love to find out more about what those roles are and what you're looking for in candidates.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Rebekah, and Deb, thanks for kicking us off. I guess I'll just give a little bit of an overview of what New Public is too. So we're a nonprofit R&D lab that's really trying to build what we call digital public spaces online. And in order to do this, we do take a lot of inspiration. We think and look at the social infrastructure that holds us together in our offline lives. These are parks, these are libraries, this is public infrastructure, and yet we don't have those corollaries online. And so that's what New Public is really kind of manifesting into the world through research, through design and experimentation, and then through building really scaled products. And we do have a few roles open. I think Deb did a good job of balancing the kind of doom and gloom with the like hope and the sunshine and the opportunities at this moment. And I think that like for all of us on this call, that's like where we really wanted to focus, is that there's a lot of energy and a lot of containers to kind of do this work. And New Public is just one of them. Just 4 of the maybe 900 jobs on that list. But I guess what I want to reinforce is that this public sensibility, understanding how to serve the public, is very necessary as we reform our internet, which is currently essentially totally owned and governed by the private and these billionaires. And so this field is, this is not the field of necessarily responsible tech and making the field that New Public is a part of making the current technology systems better. But as we think about kind of what the future could look like and how we integrate these like publicly spirited values into the future of the internet, I think that there's a lot going there where this kind of public sensibility is important. So I'm actually going to share my screen just to kind of so y'all, oh no, I can't do that. Okay, doesn't matter. Maybe Rebekah, it doesn't matter. So we have 4 roles open right now. Let me make sure that I say the right ones. Okay, so yeah, there's 4 roles. We're looking for a head of people and culture at New Public. We're looking for a head of external engagement to support us on all of our comms, marketing, and fundraising efforts. We're looking for a researcher to support our work to build essentially the simple way that I say it is like an alternative, publicly spirited next door, but essentially platforms and tools to support us to get into really healthy community locally. And then we have another project, which is a partnership with some of the largest public broadcasters in the world, ZAF in Germany, CBC, Radio Canada in Canada, ABC in Australia, where, again, taxpayer dollars, in markets where public media is respected and invested in more than here in the US, where we are working with them to build new designs and prototypes, some of which are already in beta and out in the world, around how they can improve kind of engagement and building healthy community on the other end of their surfaces. And so that's the Public Spaces Incubator. You can find out more about it on our website, but we're looking for a product manager for that project. And we will have a whole bunch. I think there are going to be a handful of new roles coming up, one of which I know is going to be an engineer. And I see some kind of eng talent here. And so, yeah, so there are these roles. Again, it's just 5 of the 900 that Rebekah's pointing to, but more, I feel like it's really important to kind of, not feel the heaviness of the moment and feel, frankly, the excitement to kind of apply all of your talent into, reforming and changing and bringing a lot more of those like public values into how we think about what the future of the internet and social media could look like.
Completely agree. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn to Camille now. So for anyone who may be navigating this transition from a role at a government agency into a different sector, you've had quite a bit of experience transitioning in and out of public sector roles. So would love to hear from you. What are some tips, or what advice would you give to people who have potentially, been laid off or are leaving a government role and are transitioning into a role in the private sector?
Yeah, I'm going to cover that from a couple of different lenses. One, I'm going to address Deb's point about consulting, because I have been doing that as well. But the transition in general, whether you have already been laid off, you are concerned about being laid off, the layoffs are causing you to just want to contemplate your job options, the first step is to start networking. I mean, talk to everyone, tell them what you're interested in, help them, ask them to help you think about what roles that fits in the sectors that you're targeting. So if you're moving from government to tech, you've got a global risk lens to the work that you did in government, and you're trying to figure out where that might land in a tech org. Maybe it's trust and safety, maybe it's government affairs, but talk to people who work in those spaces and get a real understanding for what's in the realm of the possible. A lot of times the hardest part is translating your experience into the sector that you're trying to move into. So use your network to do that. Tell them what you're interested in and have them help you voice track how your experiences translate. When I transitioned out of the Obama administration, making those linkages for people were key. I think more companies now recognize the expertise and experience and how it fits into an organization coming out of government, but you still have to do some of that work to make that translation for them and to update your resume to reflect a private sector audience. I would also say, once you start to identify what kind of roles you want, look and see if they are available or if there's something similar in sectors beyond what you thought. I think a lot of people are like, I must go to the tech sector, the traditional tech sector, a Meta, Google, to work in the kinds of fields that we are talking about. And quite frankly, there are a number of different organizations contending with similar issues. Whether it's an NVIDIA who's a chip maker and is connected into the development of AI and all kinds of things, or it is a traditional tech company or a smaller platform, open your search up so that you are orienting yourself not only around the sector, but around the kinds of roles that you're interested in. And then, of course, apply. But use your LinkedIn network to identify where you might have some connections and can reach out to someone and ask them to connect you to someone in the organization so you learn more about it, but also so you get a referral. Sometimes that little ding can help you skip all of the automated checks that happen of your resume and get somebody to actually put eyes on it, and that might make all the difference. And then from a consulting perspective, you have a wealth of expertise and experience that will be helpful as organizations seek to understand the transitions that are happening. When I left government, it was well before this transition. I left in April of last year and decided Actually, before I could even decide, I had an organization reach out to me and ask me to advise them. And it dawned on me that I could use my expertise in a variety of ways that allowed me to bridge the gap on things that I thought weren't happening in government, but also to support organizations that maybe didn't have the resources or the funding to have me full time. And I could spread around my expertise in a different way. And that was a lot of fun. I still am doing it even while I have a full-time job because it is a lot of fun and there's a lot of need out there. And so part of that networking, if you are interested in consulting or open to consulting, should be to tell people what you're good at and have them to connect you to organizations that might be struggling with issues that are relevant to your expertise.
Thanks, Camille. I want to echo what you're saying about networking. We've found at All Tech is Human that that's such a crucial component of building a career, and that's something that we try to provide with community building, with our in-person events, and other things as well. But we have 4 cities that we focus on, but now that we've started ATIHX, there's a lot of opportunity to even launch something in your own city and try and find other people to join you, and to be able to start networking that way, I think is really valuable as well. So Deb, I'm gonna turn things back to you. Would love to hear some insights that you could share from your research that could be helpful for job seekers as they're trying to make this transition. Is there any insights, anything you're finding in your research that would be helpful for people as they transition out of potentially the government sector into another sector?
Yeah, the internet was cutting out just a little bit, so hopefully all of you can hear me okay. I want to just third or fourth the comments that other folks have already made about the importance of networking, and I have a quick anecdote that I just want to share that I think really makes this point. A friend of mine, and I'll mention his name because he deserves credit for this, I think, brilliant insight. Ketan Anjaria, who runs a company called Hire Club that uses social networking and social media to get help people get jobs, help people get hired, was on the show that I host, Technically Human, a while back. And I teach at UC Berkeley a class on how to get a job in data science. And I asked him, knowing that I teach this class and knowing that I have a bunch of undergraduates who are trying to find their first job, and I imagine that I think that this advice is especially trying to transition from one industry to another industry, or from one context to another context, or one form of job title to another form of job title. I asked him, what's the biggest mistake that a new undergraduate makes when they're applying for the first job? His answer was applying for the job. And the reason that he gives that answer is that, many people submit a resume and cover letter that gets read by an automated resume scanner, maybe an HR manager who's really kind of there to look to see whether you fit the boxes or check the boxes that the job is requiring. Whereas actually most people get good jobs, and many people get their first job not by submitting that resume that really is scanned one of 1,000 resumes. And maybe if you don't use the exact right keywords, or you don't have the exact matchup of right boxes in the right checklist, you get just automatically rejected. And people, he says, get jobs through social networks. And that is because hiring relies on a principle called trust. It's very expensive to hire somebody if you're not sure whether they can do the job. That means hiring somebody, paying them a salary, losing an opportunity, or having an opportunity cost for somebody who might be better qualified and perform better in that job. And then training that person for 6, 7, 8 months before you realize that it's not a good fit. So what a hirer is really looking for is the trust that the person that they're hiring is competent to do the job and is going to excel in that role. And the best way to build that trust is for somebody else to verify for them that you are the person that they could trust, because they're going to trust that friend of theirs or somebody who's already doing that job or has some more similar kind of knowledge base. They're going to trust that person a lot more than they're even going to trust their own 50-minute or 3-interview assessment of you. They're going to trust that a lot better than they're going to trust your CV or your resume. They're going to trust somebody who they know to tell them that this is the person who can do the job. So what you want to find are people who are doing something similar, who can vouch for you, who can say, this person can do the job. This is the right person for the job. And the way to do that is to build your network. Find people who are doing something similar to you. And don't, I would say, just go ping them on LinkedIn and then, ask them for an hour of their time. What you want to do is you want to build up that trust with them. You want to say, I'm really excited and curious about what you're doing. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And then you want to iterate on that process. Imagine, for example, and this is an example that I draw from the excellent book on finding a job, Designing Your Life, which takes a design approach to finding a job. Imagine that you think that you want to start a cafe and you love being in a cafe all day and you think it's really lovely to open up an Italian style cafe where you are going to sit and talk to patrons and serve coffee and enjoy that atmosphere all day. And then you go shadow somebody who owns a cafe. And it turns out that actually owning a cafe doesn't mean sitting and talking to patrons all day. It means figuring out the budget and ensuring that you've ordered the right amount of food and dealing with waste management in order to, ensure that you have the proper structure for disposing of extra food and dealing with angry patrons who want their money back and figuring out a payment system and bookkeeping. And this isn't what you actually had in mind. So many jobs that we think we want, we don't actually want. So what you want to do is meet people, shadow them, iterate on what you think you want to do, find a model of it, and then actually practice it to figure out what is exactly right for you. Now, the other piece of advice I want to give, this is very general, independent of industry, and then I want to talk a little bit about responsible tech roles specifically. Is that in addition to iterating on a job and finding a role that you think you're really going to like and be successful in, what you want to do is you want to think about not just what title you want right now, not what you want to be right now, but what you want to be 5 years from now. And what you want to ask yourself when you're getting into that first role, especially if you're transitioning from one industry or one context to another industry or another context, is where do I want to be in 5 years? What's the job that I can get right now? Because if you're transitioning from one sector to another sector, you're probably not going to get your dream job right now. But you want to think, what is the job that I can get right now that's going to position me to get the job that I ultimately want in 5 years? And it might be taking a job at a company that you really want to work at, but doesn't really necessarily have the title that you think that you deserve. It might be taking a job at a level that you think you're above. It might be taking a job that has the title that you want, right? At a company that you're not necessarily sure that you like, so that you can transition that title and demonstrate to somebody else that you are able to fulfill that kind of role. So you want to think again about 5 years from now, not right now. Now, the challenge in looking for a responsible tech role specifically is that there is, for lack of a better word, a lack of categorization in the way that there is, for example, a principal engineer, where there's just a kind of like set template for what that job looks like. And here at All Tech is Human, one of the things that we're doing, and one of the things that my project specifically looks at, is how we can better categorize and how we can better codify this sector so that there's a better matchup between skills and what hirers know that they're actually looking for. Because the truth is that in this role, hirers don't necessarily know what they're looking for. And this makes networking all the more important, because when somebody hiring for a job doesn't exactly know what they're looking for, they may not know what the qualifications are, but they may know that they want somebody who's going to be a good cultural fit and who they can, again, to use that word, trust, to build the idea of what they ultimately want. And they want to be able to trust that somebody else has a knowledge base that they may not have to build up something that they don't necessarily have a clear vision for. So again, that principle, trust, that networking is incredibly important. Spend some time figuring out who you want to connect with, spend some time really understanding what they do, then ask them for a 15-minute, 20-minute coffee date or Zoom, where you ask them genuine, curious questions about what makes their job exciting and how they got into it, without necessarily looking for the payoff for you specifically. But I guarantee you, if somebody sees that you're competent and interested and curious and excited about what they do, when they see an open role, they're going to say, I remember that conversation with that amazing individual who was genuinely open and curious and excited about this. And I'm going to ping them and let them know that there's a job available, number one, and number two, if they're interested, I want to see how I can help.
Deb, thank you so
Point,
much.
can I just build off of that really
Yes,
quickly?
please.
So 2 quick points. One additional piece of insight is that at these tech companies, a lot of time there are templates. So even if I have a clear vision of what I need, to get that job up tomorrow, I got to use the principal engineer template and throw it up there and hope that smart people ask about it and I can kind of fill in the gaps for them as we do the interviews, or fill in the gaps with a recruiter who's not technical. So they kind of have to approximate understanding what my team does, no matter what that team is. So that's also something that you're fighting against, which makes that networking piece even more important. Also, I view a job description and even a hiring manager with a crisp, clear perspective of what they want for a role as the start of a negotiation, right? So whether that is I take the role, know that those are my responsibilities, but once I get inside, I have seen that there's an opportunity to fill gaps or include some of the other skill sets that I want to use. I am going to be building out my portfolio in a way that allows me to use those skills and allows me to add extra value by closing some gaps or capitalizing on other opportunities. So to Deb's point about don't let a job description or a level or all these other things limit you per se. I mean, I would validate just how many compromises you're making with some other people who are in the space, but that could be the start of a negotiation. That just might be where you start. And as you demonstrate value, you'll get the promotions or expand the role scope and be able to shift in ways that make it a much more interesting experience.
Thank you so much, Camille and Deb. Excellent insights. So Deepti, I'm going to turn to you as a longtime community organizer who has held roles across sectors and who's currently a hiring manager at a tech nonprofit. Could you give us some advice? What would you tell someone who is entering civil society from a role in government?
Yeah, I guess I would love to start with like one, just like forcing a little bit of like reflection on oneself. You know, like we find ourselves in these jobs and in these contexts, and then we're just kind of going with the flow. And I think it's when you're in this transition moment, it's really, really, really important to kind of ask yourself some questions. I think Deb did a great job of outlining like not only what it is that you're looking for now, but what it is that you're looking towards, like building towards also. And I think that as you do that, there's 2 things that have been coming to my mind in this conversation. One is like, if you are in fact transitioning out of the government at this moment, like, is it working with the government on like in that capacity that is interesting to you? Or is it working on kind of issues that are affecting the public that is interesting to you? I worry that people kind of like may silo themselves into like, well, I have this experience of working with the government, and so I'm going to go work with these other nonprofits or these companies in a policy role. You know, I'll work at the Facebook policy team because they have to interface with the government. And I think that you should take a little bit of a broader lens than narrowing yourself there to really thinking about how, like, at least from New Public's perspective, what you represent is how to serve the public. In order to serve the public, how do we need to be working and operating and thinking? And that's a really important complement to a lot of the skills that currently exist in nonprofits and the private sector. And so I think doing a little bit of reflection there is really important. The other framework that I love is the Japanese framework of Ikigai. And I don't know, maybe Josh or David can like throw it into the chat here. But there's a beautiful book, Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life. And it asks you to really ask yourself 4 questions. What do you love to do? What are you good at doing? What does the world need from you? And what can you be paid for? And at the intersection of these things is, I think, kind of where some really interesting, again, reflection, but then also being really clear. Like I as somebody who people ask to do a lot of these conversations with, the networking conversations, I find them the most fulfilling and the most memorable when somebody is really clear about what it is that they're looking for. That doesn't mean that the thing it is that they're looking for is the thing forever, but that they have done some thinking about, like, this is what I'm really trying to pursue in this moment. And as a result, I do find this framework really, really helpful, because it, I think, breaks you a little bit out of like, what do I need to do to get to the next job? Frankly, I did an interview recently where I felt like the person was just kind of like answering the questions they needed to answer in order to get the job. And that did not land nearly as well as somebody who was like speaking from their heart and their sense of purpose and kind of the path they were on. So that's just some advice at this moment.
Yeah. Thank you, Deepti. That's great. And one other thing I kind of wanted to piggyback off of from a previous part of the conversation about basically all of the kind of keywords and the implications of AI being utilized in the HR process. I do want to say, I think probably New Public as well as All Tech is Human, at smaller organizations, you're going to have less of a likelihood that that's going to happen. So you would be much more likely to have your resume read by an actual person without there being a filter to even get through to that level. So I also want to say, if you are concerned about that, in addition to networking, which is the better advice, also make sure you're looking at smaller organizations where you have more of a human to human potential. So that was.
And there was one more thing that I wanted to add to
Yes.
what has already been shared. People matter. And I know I like believe this deeply, but the people with whom you work is going to form your day-to-day experience the most, more than your job, more than like what you have to deliver, more than where it is that you're working. And to the extent you yourself can do diligence on the culture of the organization, who the other people are, talk to the other people working there. You know, we spend more of our working life, like our hours, waking hours at work than we do with our own families. And we spend a lot of time, you know, thinking about who we want to partner up with and build our family with. And I think that that same kind of thoughtfulness around the people element of where it is that you are headed is really important.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so I have one more question. I'm gonna give this question to everybody, and then we're gonna transition to some audience questions. And thank you. We've received quite a few excellent questions. So Camille, I'll start with you on this one. What I would love to know is how you would frame public sector experience as an asset for candidates who are applying for jobs in the private sector now. Is there a good way to translate those skills from the public sector context into other sectors? So Camille, we'll start with you, and then Deb, and then Deepti.
I mean, the answer writ large is yes. There's a lot of nuance depending on what you're seeking, what the skills are you have, what role you had. If you had a technical role, like you're an engineer, that is a lot easier to translate because much of the processes and the work that you'll be doing is going to be very similar. If, to Deepti's point, you have worked even in a policy space, but in any space in government, and you are not looking at a government affairs or policy role inside an organization, you're looking for an operational role, a technical role, a programmatic role, you might need to do a little bit more work to demonstrate how you built programs, how you maintained and operated programs. You might have to translate the scope and scale, right? Like federal agencies are huge, usually. And so the scale of the work that you're doing, the reach of the impact is something that you should be trying to qualify and quantify as much as possible throughout your resume so people can see, they're like, oh, this is commensurate to a business line in this organization or bigger than our entire company. And so if they could manage that, they can manage that here. Trying to, you know, tech loves data. So as much as you could put some data around it, that'll help you with that translation. But really thinking about when you look at the job descriptions that you're applying for and your experiences, do any of those things kind of sound similar, or can you approximate that I did that work, but we just didn't call it that internally, and then use the right nomenclature so that you are speaking the language of the hiring manager or the recruiter. Remember, you have to get past the hurdle of the fact that the recruiter is not actually the person leading the work. So even if the hiring manager could make the same linkage that you can make, the recruiter might not be able to. So you want to make sure that your resume communicates that before you're even able to step into a room and communicate it.
Thank you, Camille. Deb, what would you say?
The first thing I would say, I go back to the importance of social networks. A lot of people, when they're looking for a job, are experiencing a lot of shame. To not have a job in our society, in the United States, which is a society built on the idea that you are what you do, that our ability to generate a certain amount of income determines our value, and that our work and our work ethic is akin to some sort of essential value about who we are. It's incredibly, I think, shameful. Or I know that when I have been looking for work, I've experienced a lot of shame. And what we do when we experience shame is we try to not show the things that we're experiencing shame about to other people. And it's the hardest thing, but it's the most important thing. That right now, the most important thing you can do is tell people that you are looking for work, and tell people that you need help. Tell people that you need help. I'll give you a secret. People want to help. People want to help. It makes them feel powerful. It makes them feel good about themselves if they can help somebody. People want to do it. They want to help people that they like. They want to help people that they trust. And they certainly want to be the conduit or the in-between between somebody that they like and they think is a good worker that they trust, successfully getting a job, and a company that they care about, finding a good worker to do good work, right? So they really want to be that conduit. It's again, the hardest thing to do, but the most important thing to do is tell people that you're looking for a job and ask them for help. And that help can include asking for an introduction. It can include, can you look at my CV, or can you look at my resume? Can you look at my cover letter because you're in the kind of job that I want to find myself in? Can you give it a one over? Can you ask somebody else who you know to give it a one over so that I can get feedback on this, right? All of that kind of work, especially finding people who are in positions where they can assess it, your presentation of yourself from the position of somebody who might be evaluating it, is going to be tremendously helpful to you in two ways. First of all, you're going to get good feedback on what you need to do to iterate on what you have in order to get a job. And the second thing is that people who know that you're looking are going to help you find that job, right? The power of soft connections, if you're not familiar with the term, I recommend Googling it, is incredibly powerful here. The second thing that I do want to say, and again, this is just general advice, is to think about the idea of iteration in terms of how you want to pace your job search. You don't want to message or put in your resume to about 100 places that all look interesting to you at a time, not only because that's a lot of work, but because what a first round of negative rejections are going to give you is feedback on what you might need to do to change your presentation of yourself. Because the truth is, it's probably not that you don't have the right skill set for the market right now, or that the market is totally dead. It's probably some misalignment between what you're looking for and the way that you're presenting yourself. So if you apply to 10, 15 jobs, you get all rejections, you can say to yourself, okay, here's what maybe I need to do. Get feedback if it's possible, if it's offered to you, to decide how you're going to present yourself differently for the next 15 jobs that you apply for in order to accumulate that iterative process and in order to get jobs. And I want to just say something about rejection. Rejection stings. It sucks. I hate it personally. But if you are applying to 15 jobs and on your first 15 jobs you apply for, you get 7 job offers, okay, or even maybe 2 job offers, it probably means that you're not aiming high enough. And if you take what you get in that first 15, maybe you get a good job. I don't know. Maybe it's your dream job. I don't know what jobs you're applying for. I don't know what your dreams are. But maybe you're just not aiming high enough. And if you don't continue to apply, if you don't continue to get rejected, then you also won't know what was possible for you ultimately. And so I think there's a different way of framing that kind of rejection as, all right, let's figure out what my process can do to be better. Let's figure out how I can better present myself. And let's also figure out where exactly the match between what I have to offer and what I can get lies. So I'll stop there. I have a lot more to say. I want to make sure Deepti gets a chance to answer that question.
Yeah, very much appreciate your insights, Deb. Deepti, how about you?
Yeah, I'm eager to get to the questions part of this. I'm going to keep my comments short. As somebody who's I've never worked in the public sector. Like I've never worked for the government. So take my thoughts with a grain of salt here. But as somebody on the other side who has worked with people who work in the government, I think that the two things, or the public sector, I think that the two things that get me really excited about working with people who are coming out of the public sector is an ability to navigate scale, to do things to be thinking about scale and to be building systems for scale. And then the second is my assumption, I understand this doesn't always happen, is really thinking about what can work for everybody. And particularly for New Public, we're really interested in creating spaces that serve everybody, that serve the public interest, that are not working for this one niche. And I understand that that's not a blanket across all government experience, public sector experience, but it's the two things that get me most excited about this influx of talent that's coming in. And just because I think this is going to be hopefully helpful to some of you, the thing that makes me nervous as somebody who's creating a small nonprofit startup is speed. Are you going to be able to iterate and work fast and be nimble and move quickly? Because that is what we are doing. Again, I don't think that these are universal in any way, but if others are like me with some of these same thoughts, I want you all to know, so that then you can be thinking about how you want to communicate both of those to those strengths and also to what people's concerns may be.
Thanks, Deepti. So we're going to turn to audience questions now. We will pull up a few. So the first one I would like us to answer live is, I appreciate the point about the importance of social networks / networking for job seeking. However, this relies on access to social capital that is not necessarily equitably accessed, nepotism obviously being the extreme of this. How do we cultivate opportunities for more equitable social network building in responsible tech? Would anybody like to take that one?
I would love to talk about this.
Thank you.
So you're absolutely right. But Deb made a great point that people are actually excited to help. And I don't say it lightly when I say the network you do have, look at their LinkedIn connections and ask them to make an introduction. Leverage the social capital of the people around you. Also, there are a number of organizations that are out there in the tech space seeking to bridge that gap, to connect people who have a strong network or don't have a network and help build their network with folks in a similar situation or across demographics or affinity groups or, all kinds of things. So do some legwork also to build your network by coming to the All Tech is Human events, by joining Share the Mic in Cyber, there are a number of different organizations, movements that will help you bridge that gap. But at a base level, also don't be afraid of a cold outreach. I answer a good number of them, especially when people are clear, right? Hi, I need this from you. Can I have 15 minutes? I'm very busy, but I'm always willing to help. People who sound like they know exactly what they want, exactly what they need. To Deepti's earlier point about having done some of the mental modeling and some of the thinking through before you talk to someone, people are willing to take the extra step for you. And if you've met with some people before, they might not even need the chat. They might just be like, sure, tell me how to submit that referral for you. Is that what you're asking for? So, come to people humbly and open, use that vulnerability that Deb talked about. But I bet you will find more often than not, people even outside of your comfortable network that are willing to stand in the gap for you or help bridge a divide and make a connection.
Thanks, Camille. I also want to put a plug in for All Tech as Humans Responsible Tech Guide. We have a lot of organizations, and one of the things we prioritize is the ability to get involved in the work of these organizations. So if you are struggling to find opportunities to network, or if you're looking for new networks to navigate, the Responsible Tech Guide is a good place to look for some of those organizations that might be really helpful, in addition to All Tech as Human. So thank you. Okay, let's see, the next question I wanted to get to was from Joshua Williams. What courses, certifications, or resources would you prioritize to build expertise if you started fresh in the responsible tech space today?
Yeah, I'll take this. This is a controversial question because I think that a number of the certifications that are popping up are garbage certifications. They are attempts to collect money from people who are looking for a certification that they can add to their LinkedIn badge, or an opportunity to sell a product. But I do think that there are certain AI governance certifications out there right now that I think are really helpful. I also, one of the insights that I have from doing deep research into the responsible tech job sector is that it appears that a number of responsible tech roles are people who are internal to a company already, who have spent some time in that company doing, for example, an engineering role, and who are moving within that company, for example, to a trust and safety position, or to a trust and safety team, or to be an interlocutor between teams looking at alignment and trying to mitigate harms. And so if you are interested in these roles, one of the unfortunate things that I would say is that your certification may matter less than your understanding and knowledge of, and other people's knowledge of, what you offer within not just a particular industry, but in a particular company. Now, there are a number of universities right now that are already starting to develop, for example, science and society majors, which have been in academia for a while now, or graduate programs. Duke, for example, offers one that focuses on responsible social technological practices. And so I think that those degrees are worth it if you are really committed to this line of work, and if you can also afford the cost of a master's degree. But I would, at least for right now, pivot people away from certifications. And again, I make the exception for an AI governance one, and toward looking internally for the connections and for the people who are going to certify and verify for you.
I'll just add to this as a hirer. Like we don't really necessarily care about certifications. So I don't know how consistent that is, but just to kind of reinforce what Deb is saying, and I see Camille nodding her head too. And I think that as you think about kind of even longer term master's programs, if you're doing it because you're doing it for like a job in your career, as opposed to like doing it for thinking time or to pursue a curiosity, I think it's fair to do it for both reasons. But if you're doing it for that kind of job and career reason, then look really carefully. I mean, it goes back to people and networks, but like look really carefully at where people who are in that program are landing. Are these the sorts of people it is who you want to be in your long-term networks? If you're going to spend a year with them in their master's program, those are the people it is who are going to be helping you into the future too.
So we have time for one more question here. So let's see, the one I'd like us to address is from an anonymous attendee. In transitioning from the public sector to the private sector, I had a lot of difficulty with changing my mindset to be motivated by profit more than mission accomplishments. I was also taken aback by how much control the board has over companies. What advice do the panelists have for understanding and appreciating this paradigm shift?
Camille, I was going to ask you to speak to it first. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think you have to divorce mission from your ethos to work in tech. For me personally, there are some organizations, because of my strong desire to feel a connection to mission, that I just would never work for. I don't think, especially on the issues that are forefront in my work, like security and privacy, I would not work for certain organizations because I think they pay lip service to it rather than actually holding it as a priority in their organization. You could see that from the outside, and you can see that from people that you talk to. That said, every company is beholden to the bottom line and beholden to shareholders. And as much as they have a desire to lean towards mission, that you will have to make a business case for that. And so I would encourage you more so to, once the top line ethos matches and you feel like they're moving in a direction that aligns with your personal morals, goals, values, that then you figure out how to make a business case to do the work you want to do. While at Google, I was able to shut down all news apps, any app that could create a news clip during the 2020 election cycle, because we had global elections going on and it was going to be a problem for all of them. We would not put any of them in the store because I said, tell me the value proposition for having these news apps. Are we making enough that this is valuable and viable versus the risk to global elections that we were doing? And I made a business case as to why removing that would cause us, keeping them would cause more harm than good, and removing them would not affect our bottom line in any way, and that kind of thing. And they gave me a lot of latitude to make big sweeping changes like that, as long as I could make the business case. So find an organization that will give you the room to do that and start learning how to make a business case that connects bottom line to this work. Because at a base level, to be honest, the reason this work won't die, even though we are in the midst of this chaotic moment, is that being responsive to your users will always be a business imperative. And the more we educate users to be able to articulate and vocalize their needs and desires and what they expect from technology companies, the more they will have to listen. So part of this work has to be education. But as that happens, and even before we get on a meaningful path in that regard, companies have to be responsive to the needs of their users. And if you can make that case as part of the responsible tech work that you want to do, you should be able to, gain some momentum. It might not look the way you wanted it to look when you conceived of it, right? It might get watered down a little bit. That's a part of the process, and that happens in government too. But you can still feel aligned to mission. And if that is really important to you and you find yourself in an organization where that's not the case, then it's time to look again.
I just want to add one thing to this, though. And I think it's underlying the person's question. Like, incentive structures matter. And so I think it is really important that you interrogate the incentive structure of the organization that you're working with. And so in a business case, it is, about profitability and paying customers. But for example, if you look at social media, that paying customer is the advertiser, not necessarily the user. And that has downstream consequences. So, even if you're to go to a nonprofit and ePublic is philanthropically funded, there's a different incentive structure there because of how our board is structured with a whole bunch of philanthropists, and where our money comes from, which is from philanthropy. And so I do believe it is really important to interrogate the incentive structure of the place it is that you're going to build your own personal comfort with this tension it is that the person is raising.
And just to layer on top of that, you're completely right. There are other factors too. And this is maybe one of the things that you do in your networking is ask people how you contend with all of these things, because you might get to an organization where that's the case, but they're big enough that they could take an advertising hit or are willing to take an advertising hit. And that gets to Deepti's earlier point about the people that you're working with. Your leadership and their values also matters. So interrogating all of that as a part of your interview process will help with that mission alignment. And it might mean that your job search takes a little bit longer because you're trying to find an alignment that works enough for you to feel comfortable.
And I just want to add on to this, +1 to everything that Deepti and Camille have already said. But there is a business case for doing the right thing. As Camille has said, as Deepti has said, there is a business case for it. Predatory data practices, practices that surveil folks unnecessarily or in ways that are creepy, practices that expose your data, for example, those are not going to be profitable, and it's going to be costly for the company down the line to clean that up once it gets out of hand. And so companies are interested in doing the right thing as a business proposition for them. One way to really quickly determine whether or not a company also is ethical or responsibly minded is to look to see what their policy pages are. Google just deleted theirs. It tells you something about the direction that that company is going. One of the things that I've discovered in the deep research about responsible tech practices is that in a company, ethics really has to be built at the foundations. You cannot add it on later as a prosthetic. It really has to be at the foundations. And there are companies that are building ethics and responsible practices into the foundations. Anthropic, for example, is a company that I believe is really doing this. You look at their policy pages, you look to see what they're about. You can often determine a lot about whether or not that company cares about a mission beyond just making money. And I still believe that many of them do. Of course, they have to make money. These are companies, they are for-profit businesses, but many of them have leaders and have leadership teams that are there to try and arrive at a vision that does not preclude doing responsible things or trying to change the world in realistic but incredibly visionary ways. So those are things to look for. Does this company seem to have an ethos? Is it clearly stated? Is this something that seems to be at the backbone of what this company is trying to do? And in addition to that, what are the costs for this company of not doing the right thing? And how can I make a business proposition for that in order to arrive at a rule that works for me and also can be profitable? What I like to say is that you can do well and do good at the same time. It's possible to do both. You can do well and do good. You can be financially profitable and you can create good in the world. There's no reason why these two things need to be mutually exclusive, although they so frequently become so.
Thank you. And thanks to all of our guests today. We are out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up for us, but I do want to add one final thought. As the US federal government is cutting roles and shrinking federal programs, I do see state and local governments are going to be filling those programmatic gaps, and there's going to be opportunities that arise from that. And we definitely need to have good people filling those roles. So I encourage you to kind of think along those lines as well. All Tech is Human doesn't currently have the capacity to actively seek out those kinds of roles, state and local government, for our job board. But some people do submit roles to the job board from those types of organizations. So you'll find some from states like New Jersey, Illinois, some cities like New York, and sometimes San Francisco will be on our job board. So don't overlook that option as well and see what you can find there. Okay, so wrapping up here, I just want to give a reminder, this recording is going to be available on YouTube within 24-ish hours, and we're going to email the link to all the registrants, so even people who aren't here right now. We're also going to be sending all of the resources mentioned in the webinar. So just want to say one more time, thank you so much to our incredible panelists. Encourage everyone to check out alltechashuman.org and newpublic.org. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks to everyone who submitted questions. And everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thanks.